Namaste, and a very warm welcome to all of you to this second session of Sexual Health with Equity and Rights initiative that is co-hosted by Asia Pacific Media Alliance for Health and Development, that is APCAT Media, International Planned Parenthood Federation, IPPF, Women's Global Network for Reproductive Rights, WGNRR, Asia Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, ARROW, and CNS. This initiative aims to increase media understanding and engagement around sexual and reproductive health and rights, particularly abortion care with the lens of equity and right to health. It also provides an opportunity for media actors to engage in the She and Rights Media Fellowship Awards 2024-2025 that will be presented in a high-level online award ceremony to be held around World Health Day 2025. Please read more details of the Fellowship Award in the chat box. Friends, as we all know, our governments have promised to deliver on gender equality and human rights by endorsing a number of declarations, agreements, and other commitments. Notably among these are the legally binding Treaty Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, that was adopted in 1979 by the UN General Assembly, and this is often described as an International Bill of Rights for Women. Then we have the International Conference on Population and Development, ICPD, and its program of action that was adopted in 1994 by 179 governments at the ICPD conference in Cairo. Then the Beijing Declaration and its platform for action were adopted in 1995 by 189 countries, and it is considered a key document on gender equality and a progressive blueprint for advancing women's rights. And then not to forget the UN Sustainable Development Goals that were endorsed by our governments in 2025, and one of these goals is to achieve gender equality by 2030. But then in 2020 came the Geneva Consensus Declaration endorsed by 37 countries that takes a strong stance against recognizing abortion as a human right and aims to remove sexual and reproductive rights from the agendas of multilateral agencies. Today, we will learn from our panelists more about how safe abortion and rights are enshrined in these agreements and whether we are on track to achieve them. We will understand this problematic Geneva Consensus Declaration also and the threat it poses. A few quick housekeeping announcements before we begin. Participants, please type in your questions, comments, and reflections in the Q&A box. Not the chat box, please, but the Q&A box as the speakers present. Also, please mention the name of your media outlet or organization. We will take up all relevant questions and comments in the Q&A session after all speakers have presented. Without any further ado, I invite our first speaker, Dr. Suchitra Dalvie. Is Dr. Suchitra Dalvie there? Has she joined? I think I will just check.
No, we don't see her online.
Okay,
so,
we see. Okay,
she's
sorry.
traveling. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I would now invite Dr. Rathnamala Desai, President, Family Planning Association of India. She is head of Gynecology and Obstetrics Department and principal of SDM College of Medical Sciences. Welcome, Dr. Desai. We are really honored to have you with us today. And we would love if you could share with us the Asia Pacific regional perspective on the progress and also the lack of it around the Beijing Declaration and other promises enshrined in CEDAW, ICPD, etc. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here amongst you. Shall I share my slides?
Yes, please.
So, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to share my views on sexual health with equity and rights, the Asia Pacific regional perspective. I represent International Planned Parenthood Federation as a member of Board of Trustees. As you know, IPPF is a locally owned, globally connected civil society movement. It is a global healthcare provider, and IPPF has got more than 140 members and collaborative partners, and it works in more than 150 countries. Our work involves a wide range of sexuality and sexual and reproductive health, like comprehensive sexual education, contraception, safe abortion, maternal care, humanitarian crisis, and we also advocate for integrated health care, regardless of race, gender, sex, income, or however remote a person is. Now, talking a little about comprehensive sexuality education in the Asia Pacific region, most of the countries in Asia Pacific region have laws or policies related to sexuality education, but commitment to CSE varies significantly. Implementation of CSE is far from sufficient in most countries in Asia, and components of CSE are either completely omitted or diluted. And age appropriate education, that is only half of the countries in Asia and the Pacific, introduce aspects of sexuality education in the first grade of primary school or earlier. So we got a lot to do in this area, and there remains a lot of work to be done in comprehensive sexuality education, involving the training of the trainers as well. Now, the benefits of comprehensive sexuality education is an effective means of reaching a large population of children and young people, and it's grounded in fundamental human rights, including the right to education, health, sexuality, non discrimination, privacy, and life. In a recent survey of young people aged 15 to 24 from Asia and the Pacific, fewer than 1 in 3, hardly 33%, believe that their school taught them sexuality education well. What about access to safe abortion? Abortion is legal in many countries in Asia and Pacific, but women still face barriers to safe and legal abortion procedures. Unsafe abortion is a major factor contributing to maternal mortality. Uh, as we all know, India had started its MTP Act in 1971, and there was a major change in 2021, where they brought in the new amendments in 1921, and now the abortion laws are much more liberal compared to what it was earlier. As we know, up to 20 weeks, only one gynecologist is enough to opine that a termination of pregnancy is enough, and up to 24 weeks, two um, gynecologists have to opine. And now, up to 24 weeks, even a single woman, a woman with disability, a woman who's a victim of rape, or a woman who's a victim of incest can access safe abortion. And in the rules of MTP 2021, there is no time limit for terminating a pregnancy when there's a serious congenital abnormality. And legalizing and decriminalizing abortion is one of the first steps that can be taken to ensuring access to safe abortions for women, as seen in Eastern Asia. I'd like to share that Family Planning Association of India is a leader in forming an abortion coalition, where the main purpose is to decriminalize abortion. Now, we can see here that the liberal laws are in Cambodia, India, Nepal, China, and Vietnam. But some restrictive laws are there where only to save the life and to protect the physical and mental health of the woman, abortions are allowed in Pakistan and Malaysia. And only to save the woman's life, Philippines, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka allow an abortion. But one thing we should note that in Bangladesh, though they use menstrual regulation as a form of abortion services up to 12 weeks. And we should also note that deaths due to unsafe abortion amount to about 11 to 13% of all the maternal deaths. So it's extremely important to see that every woman has access to safe abortion. Now, talking about maternal mortality, we have achieved quite a bit in maternal mortality, and declining maternal mortality has been a success story on an average up to a certain point in time. Pregnancy and childbirth are safer, much safer than they were in 1994. And globally, the number of maternal deaths per 1 lakh live births fell by 34% between 2000 and 2020, largely due to better access to skilled and emergency obstetric care. MMR in Asia Pacific region is about 113 per 1 lakh live births, whereas in the East Asia and Pacific region it's about 74 deaths per 1 lakh live births. Even in India, in some states, the MMR is as low as 74 per 1 lakh live births, but on an average, it is about a little less than 100. And countries with high MMRs are Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Indonesia, Nepal, Pakistan, Papua Guinea, Philippines, and Timor-Leste. Countries with low MMRs obviously are Hong Kong, China, Australia, Japan, Singapore, and New Zealand. What about the unmet need for family planning? 140 million women have unmet need for family planning in Asia and Pacific. The reasons why these people have unmet need is mainly because they have no way to travel to the facility, difficulties to travel to the facility, or stockouts at the clinics, fear of side effects, lack of trained staff, lack of awareness, and mainly social barriers, opposition from partners or the families. So these are the reasons why a woman in the Asia Pacific region does not go for a contraceptive method, even if she wants to. And however, still Asia Pacific region has made significant strides in reducing the unmet need for family planning, but there are substantial differences across the countries. The prevalence of modern contraceptives is about 62.3% in high income countries, and in the upper middle income countries, it's about 60%, and in the lower middle and low income countries, it is about 45.2%. What is important is that we should offer the women wider choices of contraceptives. And I'd like to share that India has introduced two new contraceptives, though implants have been there worldwide for the last 3 decades. India has introduced implants in 2023 March, and Family Planning Association of India has played a very important role in advocating for implants and also training the master trainers and other providers for implants. And we do a lot of work in our own centers for implants, and also Depo-Provera, that is a long-acting reversible contraceptive, injectable contraceptive, and the new one, which is a subcutaneous one. What about the humanitarian crisis and SRHR? Humanitarian crisis has become worldwide now in different parts of the world, either due to natural calamities or due to man-made crisis like the war. So what happens in humanitarian crisis is there's a disruption of services, failure of provision of contraceptives leading to unintended pregnancies. We know what happened during COVID. There were so many unintended pregnancies because women could not access contraceptive services. And also this displacement can, because of the crisis, the displacement can lead to increased child marriages and other harmful practices. There's a lot of gender-based violence, and again, we saw that during COVID. And also, there'll be limited access to SRHR services in humanitarian crisis, risk of physical, mental, and psychological harm. And IPPF is doing a lot of work for disaster management and providing SRHR during humanitarian crisis. Gender-based violence, the Asia-Pacific region, sad to know that Asia-Pacific region accounted for the largest number of intimate partner or family-related femicides with 18,100 femicides, about 17,800 in Asia and 300 in Oceania in 2021. And in many countries across Asia and Pacific, physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner in the lifetime is substantially higher than the global average of 27%. It stands at 35% in India, 38% in Timor-Leste, and 50% and over in Fiji, Kiribati, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, and Bangladesh. HPV vaccination and cervical screening is also now a part of the life cycle of taking care of a woman in her sexual and reproductive health care. And hence, HPV vaccination is gearing up in India, though the prevalence of HPV vaccination is very less. However, Family Planning Association of India has started HPV vaccination in all its branches. So it's very important that we vaccinate our children between 9 and 14 years and screen our women for pre-invasive lesions and treat the pre-invasive lesions at least once at 35 years and at the age of 45 years. So not only we take care of a woman in her reproductive days, but also in a perimenopausal age group and beyond. So we also look after her to prevent non-communicable diseases as well as cancers. The one which is very common in Asia is the cervical cancer. A few words about LGBTQI plus rights. In Asia and Pacific regions, trans and gender diverse people continue to face stigma, discrimination, and criminalization of their identities. They endure various forms of violence, including conversion therapy and transphobic hate crimes perpetrated by individuals, religious and political leaders, institutions, and state actors. These challenges place communities in vulnerable positions amid ongoing armed conflicts, climate crisis, and economic instability. As a result, they often cannot access essential sexual and reproductive health services, social welfare, and human rights. Now, a transnational anti-rights movement is gaining further political, social, and economic legitimacy. Historically targeting abortion rights, various coalitions of nationalist, religious and ultra-conservative actors and organizations have become emboldened to attack gender equality and sexuality more broadly in pursuit of a regressive social and political agenda. Recent setbacks in Africa, Europe, and possibility of another in the US raise grave concerns for the future of reproductive and LGBTQI plus rights around the world. So, where are we in Asia and Pacific? The rise of a global anti-rights movement is threatening sexual and reproductive health and rights, as well as liberal democracies and the civil liberties and human rights as well of all. And anti-right actors are undermining gender justice, LGBTQI plus rights, and access to sexual and reproductive health and rights, including abortion. Now, we intend to push providing sexual and reproductive health intervention to women from all diversities that are grounded in principles of gender equality and human rights can have a positive impact on the quality of life. And it is also a step toward long-term improved health status and equity. So we at IPPF want to reach the last woman in the last mile, in the last village, and see that her sexual and reproductive health and rights are fulfilled. Thank you very much for a patient hearing. And is anything?
Thank you very much, Dr. Desai, for sharing a very, very informative perspective of the Asia-Pacific region on various aspects of SRHR and also areas where countries are lacking. Very, very insightful, Dr. Desai. And thanks for also mentioning the need for safe and legal abortion being made accessible to all women and how the LGBTQ plus communities are suffering on so many in so many areas of SRH, and also the rising threat of global anti-rights movement, and particularly perhaps done in countries where we have right-wing governments. So they are creating the anti-rights movement. Thank you very much. We will take up the questions as they come. Sure. And I now invite Menka Gordon, Program Director at ARROW, that is Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, to please brief us about the Beijing +30 process, especially in the context of Asia-Pacific region. Over to you, Menka.
Thank you, Shobha, for that welcome, and also thank you for inviting us to join the panel today. So I will briefly take you all on a journey of, introducing you to Beijing +30, the process, but also particularly introducing you to the Beijing Platform for Action and how it came about being and what it is all about. So I'll try to do it as as succinct as possible. As you know, it's a story worth 30 years, and so it's quite long and lengthy. So my name is Menka Gaundan. I'm actually from Fiji, but I currently live in Malaysia, so truly an Asian Pacific person. The two things I'm asked to do today is firstly introduce you to the Beijing Platform for Action document. So the Platform for Action, or the Beijing POA as it's more commonly known, was adopted in 1995 during the Fourth World Conference on Women, which was held in Beijing, China. And that is where the name Beijing Platform for Action comes. When it was adopted, and even today, it is recognized as one of the most comprehensive global policy frameworks on the rights of women. And so this Platform for Action is a more actionable sort of framework in comparison to more the conventions on the rights of women that were written earlier on. So this draws on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It draws on the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW. It draws on the other conventions and treaties that have been founded as international instruments before 1995, and this Platform for Action came about as a more actionable sort of framework. Then from 1995, every 5 years at the Commission on the Status of Women, or CSW, which is held each year at the UN headquarters in New York. So every 5-year interval is when the Beijing Platform for Action is reviewed. However, that's the global process. Now there's a complementary regional process to that that is also done. And I'll explain to you after this in terms of the Asia-Pacific regional process that happens. And usually this process, so right now in the +30 process, we are going to have the +30 process in 2025, which is next year. However, the regional process has already started 12 months before that, and we're already more than 80% through the regional process, which I'll explain to you later. And for the Asia-Pacific region, the UN ESCAP, there is an ECOSOC resolution which states that the ESCAP will be leading the Asia-Pacific regional intergovernmental reviews. So usually the ESCAP office in Bangkok, Thailand, are the ones who are leading the process when it comes to the regional intergovernmental review for the Beijing process. Now, the Beijing Platform for Action, for those of us who are new to this particular document, there are 12 areas of concern within this. Firstly, on women and poverty. Secondly, on women and health. Thirdly, on education and training of women. Then we have violence against women. We also have women and the economy, institutional mechanisms. We have women in power and decision making. We also have women and the environment. we have women and the media, and this must be of interest to a lot of us joining on this call today. Women, rather human rights of women, women in armed conflicts, and there is an area of concern on the girl child. So you can see, like I said, it also has linkages to other international instruments. You can see also a shadow of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, or CRC, coming in here as well. Now, we have, in terms of the review process, and especially in the Asia and Pacific region, firstly, there is a set of national review processes that happen. So there are national synthesis reports that member states put in to the UNESCAP in preparation for the regional review process. There are also some sub-regional level of reviewing that also happens. One particular one that stands out of this is the UN multi-country office in the Pacific also leads a sub-regional level of review process. There's also a sub-regional level of review process that happens in Central Asia. So there's other semblances of some sub-regional review processes that happen to amalgamate some of the national reports and some of the more overarching issues particular to these sub-regions of our broader Asia-Pacific region that happens. Now, so one of the reasons why, and some of the things that are going into the regional synthesis report, and I'll get to how we are doing the regional synthesis report in a moment. Some of the things that is important and why Beijing Plus 30 is regarded as a galvanizing moment for women's rights, is because we mark a significant juncture on women's rights next year. It's not only the 30th anniversary of Beijing, but it's also the 25th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which is on women, peace, and security. It also marks 10 years of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's, we are quite at a milestone when we head to 2025. So whilst these reports are being written, it's not only from this entire perspective of what is in the Beijing POA, and therefore we should only answer on the guidelines of the Beijing POA, but also in terms of how are we, one of which is how are we also accelerating towards the Agenda 2030 when it comes to Goal 5 on gender equality. So like I said, there are a few national reports that have been done across the region. And then there have been also sub-regional reviews that have been done across the region, which have also provided synthesis reports. This is some of the member state level work that has been done. Now, from there, the national and the sub-regional review is going to help put together the regional synthesis report. Parallel to that, there is a CSO process that is being done. As part of the CSO process, there is a steering committee that consists of organizations from across Asia and Pacific, diverse organizations who were chosen via a open call process earlier this year, have come together to work towards 7 thematic consultations that have already happened. So Aero is one of the co-leads of the steering committee on Beijing Plus 30 review in the Asia Pacific region. And they have already been, and they were widely publicized across Asia and Pacific for CSOs to participate from various walks of life in these 7 thematic consultations. And a lot of these included some of the issues that Dr. Rathnamala has already talked about. So then we from these consultations, each of these consultations have provided further knowledge on the different thematic areas of the report. And there is a parallel CSO regional synthesis report that is being put together. It's in a draft at the moment, and it's being finalized, and that will be submitted to the UNESCAP as the regional synthesis report for CSOs. Then we have the in November, which is next month, we have a regional CSO forum that is going to happen in Bangkok. And then we have a ministerial forum that is also going to happen right after the CSO forum. Before all of these things happen, before the CSO forum starts, there's also going to be a youth consultation that happens. So the youth consultation, the CSO forum, will be opportunities to participate for organizations across Asia Pacific from different cohorts, intergenerational cohort of people, to participate and take their views and opinions around the progress on Beijing Plus 30 into the intergovernmental space. Then from the intergovernmental space, and on the findings of the intergovernmental space, and after the whole intergovernmental regional reviews are complete, which is slated for end of November, we hope to feed into the global synthesis report. And the global synthesis report is what will be the foundings of CSW 69, and which is on the thematic area of the review of the Beijing Platform for Action and its 30th anniversary. So that is the plan going forward. The reports are called the analytical track. Officially, if you go onto the UNESCAP website, it talks about the analytical track, and really it's the 2 parliamentary papers and the regional synthesis report. And then you have the preparatory meetings, which are the CSO consultations, the CSO forum, the expert group meeting that has already happened, and then the intergovernmental ministerial meeting. And then it further goes on to the global level on the review in New York in beginning March 10th, 2025. So that is with the process that we are looking at, and that is with Beijing. Now, whilst we have a lot of, and I want to allude a bit to the Geneva consensus, which, Shobha talked about in the beginning, was also, around how that actually affects, and we've heard that during the, excuse me, I'm just coming out of a cold, so excuse me for that. But as we heard last month, when the Pact of the Future came, and we had 2 annexes. One was the Global Digital Compact, and the Declaration for Future Generations. And then when we, and we had all of these points that came out in the Pact, etc. And and we know that we still struggle with sexual and reproductive health and rights. And we know from certain statistics that we still lack at autonomy as women to make choices on our sexual and reproductive health. And alarmingly, for over 30 countries who have adopted the pact, they are also signatories to the Geneva Consensus Declaration. And this is a regressive anti-abortion declaration, very right-winged in terms of its framework, because one of the reasons why it's that is that it allows effectively for these states to hide under the principle of sovereignty and to release these countries from their obligation to enact these sexual and reproductive rights for women. And so it's, you know, it's a very sly move when it comes to that. And so it's really one of those, you know, international moves to, you know, to regress us when it comes to sexual rights and reproductive rights. So, you know, and that is why we need to educate ourselves in terms of this, and we need to, you know, always question the types of wins we might have in our countries, and you know, and look at the, you know, Geneva Consensus to see if any of our countries are parties to this, and you know, how can we then educate ourselves, our peers, in terms of, you know, advocating around this at home as well, because oftentimes these are the types of things that go sort of, you know, under the carpet, and we don't really think about it, whilst the bigger wins like the Pact of the Future, etc., might come in, and we'd be like, oh yeah, this is so progressive, etc., but we don't kind of underscore it against things like the Geneva Declaration or Geneva Consensus to see that, wait, there's this other thing which will impede the progressive you know, implementation of the pact and the commitments we are making, just as we've seen during Generation Equality Forum and the Global Compact that was made then. So those are the final few words that I wanted to say. Thank you so much for having me. Over to you, Shobha.
Thank you very much, Menka, for such a succinct sharing of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action and the Beijing Plus 30 review processes that are ongoing and will feed into the Beijing Plus 30 overview rather next year. So thank you very much for that. And thank you very much also for mentioning the GCD and the underlying thing, because it goes under the garb of women's well-being. That is, it starts with that. And then there are those underlying nuances which are really leading to injustice towards women. Thank you, Menka. And I request the participants to please keep on typing your questions in the Q&A box, which we will take up at the end of when all the speakers have presented. So please don't wait till the end. As well as your comments, you can type them there. I am now pleased to invite our next speaker, Kavuta Mutua, who is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and is a reproductive rights champion. She is founding director of the Legal Caravan group of lawyers who provide legal services on matters related to sexual and reproductive health and rights, sexual and gender-based violence, persons living with disability, etc. Welcome, Kavita. And could you please share with us the Africa regional perspective on progress and also the lack of it on promises enshrined in CEDAW, ICPD, Beijing Declaration, SDGs, and others? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shobha. I hope everybody can see my screen.
Yes.
All right. My name is Kavuta Mutua. I am a human rights lawyer based in Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya, which is in Africa. And it's such a privilege to be speaking to you today about the African regional perspective on the progress made on some of the regional and international human rights commitments. Now, thank you so much, Dr. Desai, for your presentation. I couldn't help but notice the similarities in the progress and the challenges between the African region and the Asia-Pacific region, and to Menka for providing a very nice overview of the Beijing Plus 30 history and the review process. As I mentioned, or as Shobha has mentioned, I am the founder of the Legal Caravan, which is a human rights-based organization in Kenya that seeks to empower the most vulnerable groups by enlightening them on matters human rights. One of our focus areas is sexual and reproductive health and rights. And as you will see from my presentation, I have focused on highlighting on the same. I am going to attempt to paint an overview and a picture of the progress made in Africa within the limited 10 minutes. And I hope, Choba, you can organize another session so that we can get into the numbers and into the details. But for today, allow me to just briefly touch on where we are and the progress made.
Can I just interrupt? Can I interrupt, Kavita? You can share. If you have numbers, please be free to share. And you you can exceed your time limit when you are presenting such important data. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay, no worries. Apologies if it's not reflected. I was trying to prepare a brief presentation on the 10 minutes, but I think we can expand our conversation as we go. Now, on the international human rights instruments, which most African countries have signed on to, include the CEDAW Convention, the ICPD, the Beijing Declaration, the SDGs, which all provide critical aspects on gender equality and women empowerment, with a focus on safe abortion, access to contraceptives, and comprehensive sexuality education. Now, for the African region, we do have specific human rights instruments, including the African Continental Policy Framework, which was adopted in 2006 at the African Union, when countries came together and realized that there was a high maternal mortality rate in Africa, with unsafe abortion being the leading cause. And then we also have the Maputo Protocol, which we celebrate as one of the most progressive human rights instruments touching on the rights of girls and women, particularly in Africa. And the Maputo Protocol expanded the provision on instances when abortion is permitted, including in cases of rape, in cases of incest, and where the life of the mother is in danger. So it's one of the instruments that we celebrate in the African region, having expanded and provided for access to safe abortion services. And then we have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which both have cross-cutting themes on access to healthcare services, access to information, and issues of gender equality. Now, on the progress achieved, it might be not as much as we'd have wanted, but a friend always reminds me that it's good to celebrate progress achieved, whether little or whether big. So I will attempt to just highlight 5 main points, including the fact that the Eastern and Southern African commitment, the ESA commitment, was developed by countries with an aim at expanding the access to and enhancing the quality of comprehensive sexuality education. So shout out to the Eastern and the Southern African countries that came together and came up with the ESA commitments, which highlights the government's commitment towards ensuring SRHR. And then we've seen an increase in availability and uptake of contraceptives over the years in many countries. I've just highlighted Ethiopia and Uganda, just to mention a few. And we've seen incorporation of CSC into the learning curriculum in some countries like South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Botswana. Again, the southern countries are really shining, and I've seen most of them are represented here today. So it's been a great progress incorporating CSC and creating awareness on SRHR for kids from a very young age in schools. And then we've also seen a reduction in maternal mortality rates due to the increased access to reproductive health services for countries like Rwanda. And South Africa, again, leading in terms of having progressive laws and policies around access to safe abortion services. So that's just brief progress as reported by some of the countries over the years. And to the Beijing +30 process, a lot of African countries are again in the process of preparing for the same come next year. Many states have already submitted their reports. And for my lovely country, Kenya, we are reporting an increase in women holding positions in the judiciary, and having progressive gender legislation around gender-based violence and reduction in numbers in terms of FGM, and a focus on SRHR. Now, despite this, I think for most African countries, the challenge has been on deeply ingrained cultural norms and beliefs, and budgetary constraints, and gaps in segregation of data, which again hinder the monitoring and evaluation process. And then we've also seen gender bias legislation, which continues to be passed, again, contrary to what the laws provide. And just briefly to touch on what other states have submitted in preparation for the review process, Nigeria reports having passed critical legislation against violence against women, and countries like Rwanda continue to shine in terms of ensuring representation of female members of parliament. I think it's the leading country in the world with the highest number. And then we've seen countries like Mali reporting and prioritization of education for their girls. Despite the many challenges, I think it's good to recognize that countries are making efforts. As to whether we are going to achieve the 2030 goal is another question, but I think it's good to celebrate the progress as achieved. And then just to touch on the challenges in the implementation of these local, regional, and international SRHR laws, there's a lot of legal barriers and restrictive laws and policies. For my country, for example, despite the Constitution having provided for the right to access abortion services, again, we have the Penal Code, which goes ahead to criminalize abortion, which again raises a concern. And then we have the cultural and religious opposition to family planning. I think many African countries have a lot of strong religious stance, and most denominations actually preach against access to contraceptives, which has hindered and has made many African girls and women reluctant in terms of access to the same. And then again, the deeply ingrained cultural beliefs, which limit access to the same. Then we've seen financial limitations and a lack of prioritization of budgetary allocation. Unfortunately, I think last year in my own country, in my own city of Nairobi, which you'd imagine is very progressive in terms of prioritizing access to contraceptives, there was an attempt to actually increase the price of contraceptive services, which would again lead to women not being able to access the same. So civil society organizations had to run to court. We had to do a lot of memos and briefs to the county government, but the same was not passed. So in cities where you'd imagine there's a prioritization in terms of budgetary allocation, we continue to have to fight extra hard to ensure that the regressive policies are not passed. And then we've seen a lot of defiance of court orders. Again, most African countries are notorious for this. We'll give an example again of my country, where in 2014, we developed what we call the abortion guidelines. And the country went ahead and withdrew the same. But we went to court, and courts asked the government to actually reinstate the guidelines, which would see to it that there's a prioritization of safe abortion services. It's now almost 10 years later, we are yet to see the same, despite the court being clear on that. And then there's a lack of political goodwill. Again, before the East African Legislative Assembly lies a very progressive reproductive health bill that would see to it that the East African countries commit towards ensuring SRHR. But I think the main issue has been the argument that it does not reflect our beliefs and practices as Africans. So there's been a lot of debate around the same, and it's prolonged, and it's stayed before the assembly. Again, showing that nations are not committed to ensuring progressive SRHR laws are passed. And then we've seen a notorious trend in terms of withdrawal from commitments. and placing of reservations on progressive SRHR laws, like, for example, the ESA commitments, which I've already highlighted as being celebrated in the Eastern and Southern region. My country went ahead and placed reservations, actually withdrew from the commitments completely, I think 1 year ago. And then on the Maputo Protocol, on I think Article 14, which we celebrate having expanded instances when abortion is permitted. Again, countries like mine have placed reservation. And what does this mean? It means that we cannot hold them accountable in terms of ensuring there's access to safe abortion services. So despite us signing on to some of these regional and international commitments, we've seen a very naughty trend in terms of silently withdrawing or placing reservation on specific progressive provisions. And then there's a general lack of accountability mechanisms for the human rights instruments. I think states have gotten away with a lot of non-implementation because all they get, I think, is just a slap on the wrist. I think it's about time we had conversations around maybe having strict sanctions for non-implementation. And then we've seen a lot of contradicting foreign policies, just what Menka was highlighting in her presentation. We've seen a lot of funny policies, international commitments like the GCD, which goes against what is provided in local laws. Like, for example, Kenya. Again, my country has signed on to this, and I think the latest African country is Mali, if I'm not wrong. And there's been a campaign in African countries led by our lovely first ladies who are encouraging signing on to these declarations, again, which go against the provisions of our local laws. So I think it's time we had conversations around whether courts can save us, whether the various committees can look into it and make sure that they pronounce themselves in terms of not forcing countries to sign on to foreign policies that go against the local laws. And then just a few recommendations and way forward. I think we need to, as Africa, we need to prioritize the removal of legal and policy barriers towards access to safe abortion services and access to contraceptives. For my country, there is ongoing conversations on decriminalizing abortion, which is the same for many other countries. And then governments should strengthen the national accountability mechanisms, as I've mentioned, and CSC should be integrated into the school curriculum. For most East African countries, this is a hot topic. There's a lot of pushback from our governments in terms of incorporating CSC. They believe all we're doing is teaching kids on how to engage in sexual activities, but there's a lot of learning and creating awareness around the same. And then we need to strengthen partnerships between civil society and governments. I know CSOs do a lot of work. My organization has done a lot of work in terms of advocacy work, writing publications on abortion and CSC and access to contraceptives, and working together with governments to just supplement what they're able to provide for. And then we need governments to be pushed to prioritize investment into health infrastructure. And lastly, we need to continue encouraging international collaborations, having such discussions so we can learn on the best practices from the various countries, and we can look into, scaling up, ensuring success in terms of achieving gender equality and SRHR. And thank you so much. I hope I'm not gone beyond the time given. Again, my name is Kabuta Mutua. Feel free to reach us on the Legal Caravan. We are happy to continue the conversation and to engage more. Thank you, Choba.
Thank you very much, Kabuta. And we need more lawyers like you too. I'm adding that to your list of what we need to do more. And thank you for giving such an overarching overview of the African region, achievements as well as challenges, and also for mentioning the Maputo Protocol. We have questions for you, which we will take up later on. And Now I'm really honored to invite Dr. Suchitra Dalvie, who could make it and is now with us. Dr. Dalvie is a gynecologist by profession, and she is co-founder and coordinator of the Asia Safe Abortion Partnership, or ASAP, that works on safe abortion rights advocacy. She is also the lead trainer at the ASAP Academy, which is the first global online learning portal for safe abortion rights. Welcome, Dr. Dalvie, and we would love to hear a global brief on the promises for safe abortion rights and SRHR enshrined in CEDAW, ICPD, and Platform of Action, Beijing and its Platform for Action, and others.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Shobha. My apologies to you and everyone for the delay. I think due to my travels, I miscalculated the time zone. So I'm really sorry. But I'm glad that there is still time for the presentation. I had one request. Since I don't have my usual setup, is it possible for someone to show the slides?
Yes, I think
that
that
would
will
be
be
wonderful.
done. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So thank you once again, Shobha, and good day to all. I would like to thank IPPF SARO for inviting me to speak on this critical issue for deliberation that sits at the crossroads of gender equality, human rights, and justice, which is the global struggle for safe abortion rights. This is a struggle that spans many decades, a range of treaties, frameworks, and programs, and reflects the unfinished revolution for women's rights and pregnant persons' rights, and the unfulfilled promises of a world that claims to enshrine equality for all. So, as we stand here today, we must confront a hard truth. The promise of safe abortion rights, embedded in many global agreements and treaties, remains far from realized. And despite the progress made in codifying these rights, millions of women and girls continue to face insurmountable barriers for accessing safe abortion services, particularly in the global south, where colonial legacies of criminalization persist. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So, why are safe abortion rights so critical to the progress of humankind? Because the inability to control fertility reduces opportunities to access education, financial independence, and overall well being. It reduces capacity to exercise autonomy, agency, and the ability to fulfill their highest potential. And criminalization does not reduce or stop abortions, it only reduces safe abortions. So here is a very powerful quote from Loretta Ross, co-founder of the sister song Women of Color, Reproductive Justice Collective, who says women have been managing their fertility for as long as they've been having sex with men. So this whole conversation, which sometimes appears to emerge, in a vacuum or just a few decades ago or a few centuries ago, is really as old as humankind itself. Next slide, please. Yeah, you can go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. So it is also important to remember that it is not just a human rights issue, it is also a social justice and public health issue. Because of all the women who are likely to have unsafe abortions, the vast majority of them live in low-income countries or in low-income pockets within the developed countries. Next, please. And it is not just an issue of law and medicine, it is actually the intersection of very complex, very overarching oppressive structures of patriarchy, capitalism, and the post-colonial world. Next, please. So how do these three intersect? Denying abortions reinforces patriarchal control over women's bodies. Capitalism exploits women's sexual and reproductive labor, maintaining economic inequality and perpetuating cycles of poverty, particularly for women. And the post-colonial legacies of criminalization. Most of our countries in the global south have a penal code, which is kind of a legacy of either the British Penal Code, French Penal Code, and many others, which perpetuate control over reproductive autonomy through legislation. Next, please. So the UN Human Rights Committee's general comment on the right to life asserts that state parties may not regulate pregnancy or abortion in all other cases in a manner that runs contrary to their duty to ensure that women and girls do not have to undertake unsafe abortions, and they should revise their abortion laws accordingly. In other words, states must have policies and laws that help women seek abortion services rather than being forced into seeking unqualified medical professionals and thus risking their lives. Next, please. Despite all these declarations, the reality is that although the Human Rights Declaration was made in 1948, it took almost 50 years for the statement that women's rights are human rights to be made in a program which was the United Nations 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing. So it took almost 50 years for us to declare that women are humans too. Next, please. And here is another very powerful statement that I think we don't speak often about. Anand Grover, who was the former UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health, made a very significant statement in 2011. He said that the denial of safe abortion can be tantamount to torture or ill treatment, since these denials violate women's right to health, dignity, and autonomy. And by forcing women to undergo unsafe clandestine procedures or carry unwanted pregnancies to term, the state is effectively subjecting them to severe physical and mental suffering, which falls under the definition of torture or cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment as outlined by the international human rights law. Next, please. So now let's look at the key global agreements enshrining the safe abortion rights. Next, please. CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, as far back as 1979, had a General Recommendation 24, which obligates states to eliminate barriers to safe abortion, and Article 12, which emphasizes access to reproductive health care without discrimination. Next, we have the ICPD, or the International Conference on Population and Development 1994, which, as we know, was a benchmark, a watershed moment in our field of work, which shifted the conversation from population control to individual rights. It recognized access to abortion as key to gender equality and focused on comprehensive reproductive health, including abortion, and the need for safe abortion as a public health measure. In the next one, in the Beijing Platform for Action, 1995, it reinforced the need to decriminalize abortion, remove restrictive laws that deny access, spoke of reproductive rights as a form of bodily autonomy, and in fact created a very big picture conversation, shifting the focus from women to the concept of gender and gender equality, recognizing that a fundamental restructuring of society and its institutions is needed. After this came the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which were adopted in 2015, which further solidified these commitments, particularly Goal 3, which spoke of ensuring healthy lives, including access to reproductive health services, and Goal 5, which was about achieving gender equality by ensuring reproductive rights. It also called for universal access to sexual and reproductive health services by 2030. So it is not just that safe abortions save lives, but also at the heart of this is the issue of bodily autonomy and the fundamental right to make decisions about one's own body. So criminalizing abortion actually interacts with patriarchy and capitalism and so many other controls. And despite all this, we have actually had much progress and successes. If you look at this chart, since the time of ICPD, over 50 countries have liberalized their abortion law to some extent or the other. And there is now very few countries where you can see those dark red spots, which are the ones where it is completely prohibited. So we have really come a long way. Although just having the law changed, we know doesn't really translate into the safe abortion access to people on the ground. But this is still very much good progress. Now we have new challenges. So in the next slide, I will talk to you about a new challenge that has emerged, the Geneva Consensus Declaration of 2020. So this was introduced by the Trump-Pence administration and signed by 32 countries. It claims that there is no international right to abortion. And although the declaration was subsequently repudiated by the Biden administration, it doesn't seem to be dying. And its supporters hope to mobilize signing nations to remove SRHR from the agenda of multilateral agencies, including the UN and Organization of American States. So now, while this is something we should be very, aware of, and we need to make sure that we are involved in strategizing in order to mitigate the risks that could be caused by this, we also need to recognize that sometimes a lot of these activities are actually a sign that we are doing well, and we are therefore facing this pushback. And in a way, it is important for us to remember that even in countries where we have the abortion law, there is still potential for it to be taken away, as we have seen with the example of the United States. And therefore, we need to continuously do advocacy to keep top of the mind and remind people constantly that safe abortion as a right is very, very integral to human rights of all pregnant persons. Next, please. So there have been, again, where we have got the Geneva Consensus, we've also got a place where a country like France, where the lawmakers convened a special session and voted to amend their constitution, making France a pioneer in enshrining the freedom to undergo abortion. So it's the first country in the world to explicitly protect the right to abortion in the constitution. So we do have some really good positive examples that we can work towards as well. Next, please. And what I wanted to leave us with, we usually have a conversation which we talk about the law, we talk about the policies, we talk about programs, medical facilities. But I think it's time for us to also step back a little bit and consider, as a movement, as a sexual and reproductive health rights movement, or as a safe abortion rights movement, are we really future ready? Some of these things which are happening in the tech world, or the social changes that are happening outside of where we focus on, something very radical is happening. Things are shifting in ways that were unimaginable just a decade ago. And in fact, it is expected that the first robot-human marriage is going to take place in the next couple of decades. So are we bringing our voices to the new emerging tech world of sex robots, artificial intelligence, what that could mean for human agency, autonomy, and personhood? Next slide, please. And there are already conferences and journals which are publishing articles about the future of intimacy between robots and humans. And somewhere I feel it is really, in a way, it's quite ironic that we are still stuck in conversations about whether we should teach, small young human beings what their body is like, how it functions, what is sex, how to protect themselves. As they grow older, having the right to access contraception, having the right to terminate an unwanted pregnancy. Whereas the rest of the world seems to have shifted into a completely different zone at this point. So the future of intimacy, the future of interpersonal relationships is shifting. If you see the next slide, the future of reproduction might be shifting as well. So in the next slide, if I could request, you will see this image of a lamb which has been grown in its entirety in an artificial womb. And we really don't know what kind of ethical, social ramifications this kind of technical progress may have. And I think it's time for us as a movement to also start exploring, how are we going to engage with those movements? Otherwise, what's going to happen is they are going to lead the conversation on the future of sex, sexuality, intimacy, reproduction. And we are still going to be, stuck firefighting the age-old issues that we always have. Next slide, please. So ASAP organized a conference earlier this year called Abortion and Reproductive Justice, the Unfinished Revolution. And we have started to now look at conversation beyond just pro-choice and pro-rights into talking about reproductive justice, because that really speaks of the intersectional frameworks of oppression and how we need to dismantle all of them so that we can be truly free and so that we can truly have rights. Next, please. So here you can see them holding a banner saying we are making history. And that is also something important. So as I was, preparing a presentation of what was done in 79, 94, 95, it's important to remember whatever we do today is also going to affect what happens in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Next, please. And I think in closing, I just want to leave us with a reminder that we really need to build inclusive movements for reproductive justice. Very often in meetings like ours, we find only people who are working on safe abortion rights or SRHR to be in the meetings. But we can't really separate our movement building work from sexuality education, preventing early and forced marriages, eliminating the practice of female genital cutting, intimate partner violence, women living with disabilities. And we can't really afford to be disengaged from the sustainability and climate change conversations either. Next, please. So I just want to close with a reminder of, we need to create new spaces, maybe even rejuvenate former spaces. And I was remembering on sexual and reproductive health rights in our part of the world, and possibly other conferences which happen across many regions, because a lot of the large global conferences we see are not really focusing on the issue of safe abortion at all. Very few conferences, the Abortion and Reproductive Justice Conference, and perhaps we had some space here. So I think collectively as civil society, as people who are engaged in the movement, I think this is also probably our responsibility towards the future generations, is to maintain and recreate the spaces where we can safely and openly and on a regular basis have these conversations. So with that, I would like to really thank you for your patience, apologize once again for the miscalculation of time. And a big thank you to Shobha as well as Harjot, who gave me the opportunity to share my thoughts here. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much, Suchitra. Thank you for being with us. In Hindi, we have a saying, "De raha hai, durust hai." बहुत अच्छे दुरुस्त आए. Very,
Thank you,
very,
Ji.
very
Thank you.
timely intervention, and for also emphasizing upon importance of safe abortion rights and building inclusive movements, which is very important to see the broader perspective. And thanks for sharing the positive example of France, where we still have people and governments which give us hope. And also for
Absolutely.
pointing out about, are we future ready? and what we do today will affect our future. At the same time, I would like to say that still we continue to grapple with sexual and gender-based violence and rapes taking place every day, perhaps every minute, at least in a country like India and perhaps other countries of the region. Where is the reproductive justice and bodily autonomy for all those who are survivors and victims of, the menace of patriarchal society? I would say again that these are points for us to reflect on. But thank you very much for your presentation. Uh, our
Thank you
next
so much.
speaker, thank you. Our next speaker was to be Stephanie Mushu, a human rights lawyer in Kenya, who has worked in gender and reproductive justice. But unfortunately, she has had a sudden emergency health issue leading to her hospitalization. And she has just messaged me from the hospital that she's waiting to be seen by a doctor. And if it is possible, she will join, but I think it is unlikely. Uh, so I invite our next speaker, Tushar Nirula, who's country director of Mary Stopes International, Nepal. Welcome, Tushar. We are very honored to have you with us. And can you please share your insights on agreements like Geneva Consensus Declaration and other regressive policies, how they impact the work of organizations working on SRHR related issues? Over to you.
Thank you, Shobha. Hi, everyone. It's honor and privilege to be here and sharing the podium with such a dignitaries. And in today's session, I'll be talking about the impact of the regressive policies. And before that, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay. So my name is Tushar Nirola. I'm the country director for Mary Stopes International Nepal. And MSI in Nepal has been working in safe abortion and family planning services and also on other women's health services since 1994. And we have been working very closely with the government of Nepal and at the grassroots level, providing the access to the safe abortion and family planning services since 1994. To start with, the impact of regressive policies like Geneva Consensus Declaration. I think Dr. Suchitra and Menka has briefed about the declaration, but the things that I want to reiterate here again is that this kind of declaration is absolutely a conservative, authoritative, and repressive towards the choice of women for their reproductive rights, as it promotes no right to abortion. Further, the declaration is meant to be for the woman's health and gender equality. However, it neither promotes the health rights of women nor includes any issues of people from sexual minorities. It pushes against the international efforts to abortion as a human rights and ironically calls for global health policies to focus on improving maternal health without prioritizing abortion. Now, talking about the safe abortion law in Nepal, safe abortion was legalized in Nepal in 2002. And according to the law, women in Nepal can access safe abortion services within 12 weeks of gestation on request with the choice and consent of pregnant women. Within 28 weeks of gestation with the consent of pregnant women and doctor's recommendation if pregnancy poses a danger to women's life, physical or mental health, or if there is a fetal abnormality. Within 28 weeks of gestation, with the consent of pregnant women, if the pregnancy is resulted from rape or incest, or if the woman is HIV positive. So you can already see Nepal has got a very progressive safe abortion law in country, but it can pose a threat. and the consequences of Geneva Consensus Declaration can have a very negative impact. Although Nepal is not the signatory of Geneva Convention Declaration, however, there's a rise in anti-abortion group promoting pro-life. This may further fuel anti-abortion movements or conservative forces within Nepal, especially the religious organizations or individuals. And the most important thing that I want to highlight is, as Dr. Suchitra mentioned, that we cannot be complacent in countries where we have a progressive law. These kind of declaration will encourage anti-abortion movement, and active opposition from religious groups may potentially lead to the rollback of safe abortion laws. Therefore, we cannot be very complacent of the progressive laws in the country as well. If we talk about the opposition, 28 out of 36 countries within MSI network have reported active opposition against sexual and reproductive health rights in last 2 years. 8 country programs in MSI network reported direct attack from anti-abortion, pro-life group, and many more reported attacks from local organizations. As a result of these activities from the GCDs can create a barrier to access to safe abortion service, which could lead to an increase in unsafe abortion, resulting in high maternal morbidity and mortality. So how do we leverage the advocacy? So pro-choice organization should present evidence showing that unsafe abortion are a significant cause of maternal deaths. If we talk about Nepal, as I've mentioned earlier, legalization of safe abortion in Nepal was done in 2002. And after legalization of abortion, maternal mortality significantly dropped by 72% from 1996 to 2022, from 539 maternal deaths per 100,000 lives to 151 per 100,000 lives. And to note here is, still, unsafe abortion is third leading cause of maternal mortality in Nepal. As declaration highlights national sovereignty, pro-choice must advocate that national policies on reproductive health should reflect local needs, values, and public health priorities. Pro-choice organizations should stress that gender equality and women's health mentioned in the declaration will not be achieved by denying women's control over their reproductive health, including access to abortion services. And GCD commits to non-discriminatory healthcare for women. However, restricting abortion services disproportionately affects marginalized groups such as poor women, rural populations, or ethnic minorities. Restriction on abortion law means promoting unsafe abortion. Way forward, how do we move forward? One of the important things is we have seen a lot of funding being reduced on activities for safe abortion services. Donors should continue to commit for comprehensive sexual and reproductive health rights, including abortion services and advocacy. There should be an international coalition against the policies like global gag rule or Mexican city policies, which has been a barrier to access funding to build sustainable reproductive health system. In communities where religion plays a significant role, engaging progressive religious leaders, influential people who support reproductive rights can help shift narratives in respectful and culturally sensitive manner. And most importantly, build a good rapport with different media in the country and encourage positive publication towards essential healthcare services such as safe abortion. With this, I would like to thank you, Shobha and CNS, for this opportunity to speak. Thank you so much. Over to you, Shobha.
Thank you. Thank you, Tushar. Just a moment. Thank you, Tushar, for a very good presentation and for letting us know of what is happening in Nepal. And again, despite not joining some regressive policies, despite having good laws, what happens on the ground is also very important. So implementation, we need to have laws, very important, but their implementation on the ground level and for involving the people and community, that again is very, very important. So we have a lot many questions, so we will take up as many as possible now from our participants. We have a question from Rita Vidyadana, who's a very senior journalist from Indonesia. And Indonesia is one of the countries which has signed the GCD, is a signatory to it. The first, Rita Vidyadana was also a former editor of the Jakarta Post. Rita has a question for Dr. Rathnamala, that reproductive health, women's health, and abortion are among hot political issues now in the world, including in the Asia Pacific regions, and many of the countries are still facing many challenges. In the current US election session, as there are hot topics, as a superpower country and perhaps role model of many countries, the majority of US population is against reproductive rights and safe abortion. Dr. Rathnamala, can you share your thoughts on how this is going to impact SRHR in other countries? Is Dr. Rathnamala there? Yes.
Yeah, you can see the political drama going on right now.
Yes.
And
yes.
Two opposite poles, one would be supporting the abortion rights
Yes.
and the other one is against it.
Yes. Yes.
And if at all they oppose the abortion rights, then it is going to be a very retrogressive move. And then indirectly, it is going to affect the whole world. As it is, we are seeing how the policies of US are affecting the whole world. So this policy also will affect the whole world directly or indirectly. Fundings will be affected, and definitely it is going to cause a negative impact on all the countries, directly or indirectly. Though some of the countries may do well in spite of that, but many countries which depend on funding from the US will suffer.
Okay, thank you. There is another question from Rita for Menka. Just a moment, yes. Menka, the question for you is that reaching 30 years after the Beijing Declaration, countries in Asia Pacific region are still not achieving gender equality among their citizens, despite efforts and issuance of legal frameworks. What are the most problematic issues that hamper women from fulfilling their rights to education, to get into labor force, political participation, and social justice?
No, thank you. Thank you for that question. So, not only for Asia Pacific, for the entire world, we actually, and if you've read the Global Gender Gap Report that is produced by the World Economic Forum each year, we are close to 143 years away from closing the gender parity. And the gender gap report talks of 4 dimensions. And those 4 dimensions also includes exactly on things that you said: education attainment, women's political participation, labor force participation of women, and also health sector index, things that we are talking about today. So, and this is why SRHR is also very important, because all of these things go hand in hand with the ability to be educated population. Comprehensive sexuality education goes above and beyond just the practice of sexuality, but it goes in terms of a wholesome ability to be able to live as people and to be able to participate productively in labor force. And then we also have, so for each of our countries, for Asia Pacific, you'd see within the Global Gender Gap Report, you'd see that none of our Asia Pacific countries are faring, at least in the top 20, we are not faring anywhere close there within any of those indices. So we, and that's a stark reality for us. In terms of women's political participation, we are quite low. I mean, given a few exceptions here and there, the rest of our countries are quite low when it comes to women's political participation. So we need to be informed in that way. Our patriarchal society is still very ingrained. Our legal systems are still very conventional. Our governments are a lot right-winged governments. And actually, we are regressing. In some of our past gains, we are actually regressing if you see some of the indicators. So indicators around female genital mutilation or cutting, indicators around access to contraception, actually contraception use. These are indicators that we are, if you see post-COVID numbers, we are regressing because of the family rhetoric that is being served to us by our right-wing governments. So these are things that we need to be mindful of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rita also has a question for Dr. Dalvie. Again, talking of the Trump and Pence policy against reproductive rights and safe abortion, which is still haunting the USA and the world. Since US had been the largest donors to promote SRHR around the globe earlier, now it cuts funding across UN agencies and CSOs working on the issues. Dr. Dalvie, do you see its impact on SRHR progress now? How has it impacted and will it continue to impact that?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very important one. And those of us who are working on the whole conversation of decolonization, I think it's something we all need to take into account because we've never really had a domestic donor base in our part of the world which supports this kind of work. So on the one hand, we speak of the hegemony of the global north on geopolitics. On the other hand, most of our funding comes from those sources, including countries in Europe which have been colonizers in the past. So I think it's time for us to also start figuring out how are we going to find alternate sources of funding. And I would just like to share here something which was presented at the ARJC conference by someone who works in Europe. And they had done a study of the roots of anti-choice funding. And they said something very powerful, that the anti-choice funding is coming from the so-called noble houses of old Europe, which had strong ties to the church and are still funding a lot of the anti-choice work in the US as well as our parts of the world. So I think, and the amount that he mentioned was, I think, almost 10 times the amount of money that has been made available to us even through our donor funding. The large donors, the small donors, the foundations, everybody put together, we don't have as much money as they do to oppose safe abortion rights. So I think in that context, it's not just about funding. I think it's also about the politics of the funding. And that is something which each one of us needs to internalize and strategize around. Because, as all of us have repeatedly said, this problem doesn't seem to be going away in a hurry. So we need to figure out how are we going to take the right steps now to set the foundation of what future generations are going to have to work with.
Thank you. Thank you. We have two questions for Kavita. One question is from Lizzie Otayo, and she says that the EAC SRHR bill has been in discussion for quite some time. Is there a future for this bill? Kavita.
Sorry. Yes, I'm here. I think for the East African Reproductive Health Bill, yes, there is hope and a lot of hope at that. I think when we started the conversation back in 2017, most of the parliamentarians did not even want to listen to our concerns around CSC, abortion, and access to contraceptives. But one of the strategies we used was to have meetings with smaller groups, especially those that were really against it, and to have one-on-one conversations with them away from the larger groups, address some of their concerns. And we've seen a lot of progress with more of the parliamentarians supporting the same. So I would say, yes, there's a lot of hope and we cannot give up. I think we've come from quite far So hopefully in the next few months, we are going to see a lot of progress with the same. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Another question for you from Mona Yadav, a gender activist from India. She says, can you talk about the SRHR rights of women and girls in Congo and Sudan, which are in conflict, and also reflect on the rising cases of femicide in Kenya?
Yeah. Okay, so I think for the legal caravan, as I mentioned, we have SRHR as one of our focus areas, and we also have refugee rights as another focus areas. So this is a topic close to our hearts as we're able to address SRHR for that specific vulnerable group of women involved in conflict, women that have been displaced, who face unique challenges. So I think it's important for focus to be shifted and to be directed towards SRHR in the context of women that are in war-torn countries and to address the unique challenges they face. And I know Deraso from my team is actually tuning in, and she can agree with me that there's need to actually focus on the specific challenges faced by refugee girls and women. And the other question was on the ongoing femicide in Kenya, which is again a topic close to our heart. I think in the current month we've had 5 cases of femicide. So for us, we are continuing to push for accountability and justice to be done for the women and for the girls and their families. We're also pushing for a specific legislation that recognizes femicide as a crime and for prosecution to be done, giving attention to femicide as a crime. So we are pushing for that with our governments, and we continue to speak up and to share the stories. But it is actually a bad trend happening in our country, and we hope that even as we're reporting in the international and regional human rights mechanisms, we are going to be able to highlight that, and that our government will be held accountable, because there's little to no action being taken, I must say. Yeah.
Thank you. And Mona also has a comment plus perhaps a question hidden in it, that all the speakers have talked about SRHR rights, abortion rights of women, and the international conventions on the same. But what about the women and girls of Gaza who are facing genocide for more than a year? And I think that goes for other women living in conflict areas. So would the speakers like to share their perspectives on it? What about their SRHR rights and how can they be helped? This is not directed towards a particular speaker, but if any of you would like to comment on that. Women living in conflict. Yes, please.
I think I mentioned about humanitarian
Yes,
crisis, both man-made and
yes,
natural
right.
calamities, where
Yes.
SRHR is the one which suffers the most.
Yes.
And we also saw it after COVID, what happened after COVID as well. Now, IPPF is doing a lot of work in the humanitarian crisis. Even in Gaza, they are providing sexual and reproductive health services. But I think everybody should be helping them. It's not that just one organization is going to do all the work.
Yes.
And we have to particularly look into people who are displaced, people who have lost their homes and lost their families. They are the ones who need to be taken care of.
Yeah. Thank you.
If I could just add,
yes, please.
add something, yeah.
Yes.
So just to say that, I think it's important for us to also speak out about the horrors and the genocide that's happening in Gaza, even if it doesn't directly translate into SRHR's work. I think in the larger perspective of understanding reproductive justice as part of a spectrum of social justice, and where there is no peace, there can be no justice. There is no accountability, there can be no justice. And where there is no justice, we can't really expect reproductive justice. One of the similes we often give is, if the forest is on fire, you can't save one tree. So unless we are willing to step up and speak out and, say that, look, this is on fire, we need to put it out. I think it's very difficult to expect, smaller, what shall I say, superficial measures really to support the people there who are in unimaginable distress. Even the women in Afghanistan who are now not, literally been invisibilized and erased from public spaces. So I think there are many, many spaces where, which could benefit just from us collectively acknowledging the wrong that is being done and speaking out against all kinds of injustice everywhere. Thank you for that question. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, I also wanted to add very quickly, I think just one sentence. Something that I said, and I might have said it too quickly, was that the importance of next year is that it's not only the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action, it's also the 25 years of the UN Security Council resolution on 1325, which is on women, peace, and security. And, that also brings to the fore, a accountability mechanism that we can also sort of use to say that, hey, this is also there, and guide all of these notions within that. So, I just wanted to make that point apart from all the other points that have been made by Dr. Rathnamala and Dr. Suchitra. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. There is a question from Jitima Jantanamalaka from Thailand for Tushar. And she says, Dear Tushar, Nepal is a good example of safe abortion policies, but are services equitable and accessible in rural areas too? Tushar.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you for the question. I would say yes, and this is because government has prioritized the services, SRH services in the country, and has been working rigorously to provide the essential services in rural parts of Nepal. And in the government facilities, it's available free of cost for any of the people seeking for SRH services. And most importantly, organizations like us, MSI and IPPF, through our different service delivery models, we have been working very closely with the government to make this service access in the hard-to-reach areas, in hilly areas, and mountainous region where government health facilities are not equipped to provide these services. So I would say yes, it's increasing. And the partners are working very closely in a very coordinated way with the government to improve the access to the services.
Okay, thank you. Jitima has another question. She says few countries like Indonesia and Pakistan have already become part of regressive and the anti-gender justice GCD. And I would like to add the name of Kazakhstan because I think these are the three countries in the Asia Pacific region who are signatories to the GCD. How can we reverse this? Is Beijing Plus 30 review process an opportunity to highlight such threats too? Any of the speakers can answer that, please. Menka, would you like to say something
Yeah,
on that?
so I mean, one of the things that we have, been doing is trying to also meet with these member state representatives to whether it has been in New York, in Geneva, etc. To have some diffused level of conversation around, okay, this is why this may be problematic to your countries. And this is why, perhaps when you have your representatives from your different countries, from the capital, from your different countries within these spaces during CSW or during HRC processes, etc., it may be good for you to speak about these issues and the importance from the international community. Sometimes it also pays to have like-minded by like-minded I mean those who are progressive like Nepal,
Yes.
etc., the member states to have that conversation with the other member state, because it's reversing this thing of, like I think I said earlier, that when we see that a region is shifting towards right-wing government, then everybody is shifting towards right-wing governments. But also, it's important for us to also see or harness those relationships where we have progressive governments,
Yes.
and how these progressive governments can sort of entice other governments to shift towards a more progressive stance. So that is something that we've been continuously doing on the sides. Also, for a lot of governments, and for a lot of organizations, etc. I think sometimes when we talk to governments, member states, state enterprises, whoever it might be, to talk about rights, especially women's rights, it can be seen as a threat. SRHR is far down the ladder on that. So if women's rights is a threat, SRHR is probably the threat of the threat. You know what I mean. So you can use more softer issues like climate justice, etc., because it does intersect with SRHR and all of that, to start a process to sort of speak about that, and sensitize member state enterprises with that. So you just have to it's a very incremental process to go with, and that's what we've been doing for some time as Aero, and that is why there's been a lot of questions from CSOs actually, on whether we should still continue to be in these intergovernmental spaces, especially a space like COP is really under the radar in terms of do we go there or not? But it's far more important to be on these spaces to make this sort of interventions that you necessarily may not be able to make on ground at home. So like I can't fly into Pakistan and start talking about these things in Pakistan without a fear, of course, or in Kazakhstan, or in any other country for that matter. So maybe an offshore approach is a good introductory taster. Thank you.
Thank you. Edith Magak she's a very senior journalist from Nairobi. She wants to know that in many countries, the legal age is 18 years and parental consent is required in accessing SRHR services, which limits adolescents from accessing them. What can we do to ensure increased access to these services for adolescents while also not lowering age of consent, because we still need to protect children? So there is a conflict there. Menka, would you like to say something on that, or any?
Yes. CSE
Yes.
is the answer to that.
Yes.
But also, one of the things I want to say is a lot of this age of consent dilemma comes from the fact that our world has changed, but some of our laws have not.
Yes.
So I think we've heard before that a lot of our laws are still, very regressive from our colonial legacies, etc. So we need to have, firstly, we need to accept the fact that sexual debut is becoming lower as an age. And that is, something that a lot of us are not accepting. So unless we accept that reality of today, and unless we go down the path of reviewing our age of consent, which we know, and this question also says is a far-fledged conundrum. So then, until that, CSE is the answer to this.
Any of the other speakers would like to add something to that? Any of the other speakers about access to SRHR for adolescents? No? Okay, we move forward. We have already run over the time, but I'll just take one or two more questions. Barbara Vangare wants to know, does safe abortion include access for minorities such as trans men, lesbian women, and non-binary persons? How do we ensure integration?
It should include everybody. It should include. And we at Family Planning Association of India, we include all minorities. We never refuse. We have a no refusal policy, and we provide services for everyone who comes, and we are inclusive in that sense. Yes.
Thank you. There is a comment from Kalpana, who's a senior health journalist from Nepal. She is editor of Health TV Online Nepal. She says, yes, laws and policies are very important, but law does not work alone. Implementation part is very crucial. And Tushar has pointed how they are implementing it in Nepal, and it's being in other countries as well. But yes, implementation on the ground, implementation of laws is the next important step. We have also a comment plus a question from Maya Joshi from India. And she says countries have not been at same pace when it comes to legally binding treaties like CEDAW. Now with rising fundamentalism, militarism, capitalism, all of which are setbacks to gender equality. We also have the regressive Geneva Consensus Declaration, which is a big threat. What can be done to what can we do to protect gender equality work from threats like GCD and ensure that we keep on working towards the work towards gender equality accelerates everywhere? I think the question has been answered partly by some speakers, but if somebody wants to add more to it, please, you are welcome to do so.
Maybe just to add, as
yes.
one of the strategies we are looking at for Kenya in terms of addressing the regressive laws and policies that also contradict our local laws, we are looking to our courts to address that contradiction. So I don't know if it's possible for countries to highlight the contradiction and file cases in court, because that's one of the directions we are taking, particularly for the Mexican city policy. Yeah. So apart from reporting before the regional and international committees, I think turning to courts could be one of the strategies we can use.
Thank
Gender
you.
equality
Yes.
would also come by engaging men and boys. That is the most
Very
important
right.
thing, where
Very
I
right.
think educating men and boys and telling them that they are equal to women is more important than telling women that they are equal to boys.
Yes. Very, very important. I had read it somewhere that while we have been empowering women, we have not failed, but we need to make men understand how to adjust to that empowerment of women, which is lacking, which is not there. So they are not able to take that in their stride and continue to live in their old world of entitlements, which they feel they have by virtue of being a male, particularly in many Asian societies. So we have, I think, over exceeded the time, but it has been a wonderful discussion. And we come to the close of today's session. My sincere thanks to each of our speakers for their invaluable insights, and a big shout out to our participants for the lively interaction. A little bit more on Geneva Consensus Declaration before we close. This declaration was first signed in 2020 and then reaffirmed in 2021-23. It was co-sponsored by Brazil, Egypt, Hungary, Indonesia, Uganda, and the US. Of course, US was the main person, but it was co-sponsored by these countries as well. Then later, Brazil and USA withdrew from the document, and as of now, there are 37 countries that are signatories to this controversial declaration. 3 of them are in Asia Pacific region, as far as I can think: Pakistan, Indonesia, and Kazakhstan. And the irony of it is that while it emphasizes the declaration emphasizes on improving women's health globally, it notably avoids mentioning access to abortion services as part of reproductive health. In fact, it takes a strong stance against recognizing abortion as a human right and asserts that there is no international right to abortion, nor any obligation to finances to finance or facilitate abortion. So we need to be very, very wary of the language and of what the declaration says. And as we end, we know the year 2025 will mark the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. And in 2025, the 69th session of the Commission on Status of Women will undertake a review and appraisal of the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. So let us hope for the best, and let us hope for better enforcement of positive action on ground towards translating the best of the laws which are there and for improving the laws elsewhere. So namaste and bye till we meet again next month for the third session of She and Rights Initiative. And thank you once again to each one of you.